and I wouldn't sell this boat to any man unless I really knew he loved it. In the world of westerns, few names carry as much weight as John Wayne, with his towering presence and unforgettable roles. He came to embody American masculinity and rugged heroism on screen. But behind the Hollywood spotlight, not everyone admired the Duke. One actor in particular, often seen playing his on-screen rival, harbored a deep personal resentment toward him. That man was Lee Van Cleef, a legendary figure in his own right, known for portraying intense, morally complex villains in some of the genre's most iconic films, while professional rivalries in Hollywood are nothing new. Van Cleef's disdain for Wayne ran far deeper than simple competition. This wasn't just about roles or screen time. It was personal. So what sparked such lasting animosity between two of Western cinema's most iconic stars for years, the reasons remained largely hidden. But now the truth behind Lee Van Cleef's hatred for John. Wayne is finally emerging. Let's uncover the untold story behind one of Hollywood's most intense off-screen feuds, from World War II to Hollywood villain Lee Van Cleef, born on January 9th, 1925. In Somerville, New Jersey, was destined to become one of Hollywood's most iconic figures in the world of westerns, while many know him today as the steely-eyed villain from countless films. His journey to fame wasn't a typical one. Van Cleef's early life and career beginnings offer a glimpse into the life of an actor who didn't just find his way into Hollywood. He forged his own path, overcoming adversity and carving out a place for himself in one of the most popular film genres of all time. Van Cleef's story starts far from the glitzy lights of Hollywood. He grew up in New Jersey during the 1920s and 1930s, a time when the world was on the brink of major global change. As a young man, Lee Van Cleef's life took a dramatic turn when he joined the U.S. Navy during World War II, serving as a radio operator. He found himself stationed on the Pacific Front, where the harsh realities of war shaped him into the stoic and resilient figure that would later captivate audiences. Like many young men of his generation, Van Cleef's service in World War II was a defining chapter of his early life. After the war ended in 1945, Van Cleef returned to civilian life, unsure of what his future would hold. But the experiences he gained during the war would play a key role in shaping the man. He would become returning to post-war America. Van Cleef found himself yearning for something more. With an unshakable sense of determination, he decided to try his hand at acting, a decision that would change his life forever. By 1946, Van Cleef had started making his mark in Hollywood, taking on small roles in B-movies and television shows. He was far from a household name at that point, but his striking appearance, sharp angular features, and intense eyes made him a natural fit for roles that required toughness or intimidation. He quickly became a recognizable face in low-budget films, often playing supporting parts that allowed him to establish a reputation in the industry. However, it wasn't until the 1950s that Lee Van Cleef's career began to take a more defined shape. Throughout the 1950s, Van Cleef found himself appearing in a variety of Western films and television series. It was during this time that he began to solidify his place as one of Hollywood's go-to-bad guys. His appearance, which seemed to exude danger and toughness, made him a natural choice to play villains or morally ambiguous characters, often opposite these heroic leads. Van Cleef's demeanor, shaped by his experiences in the Navy, and his earlier life, helped him bring a sense of authenticity to his roles, allowing him to stand out even when he was playing a secondary character. The Western genre, which dominated Hollywood in the 1950s, was a perfect fit for Van Cleef, while he was frequently cast as the antagonist. his roles weren't limited to the simple bad guy stereotype. Van Cleef's performances were complex and often deeply layered, showing that he could deliver more than just the typical villainous snarls. His characters were frequently morally gray, adding a unique depth to the standard portrayal of Western antagonists. His ability to convey a sense of both danger and depth in his characters helped to make him one of the most compelling actors in the genre. In the mid to late 1950s, Van Cleef's reputation continued to grow, and his performances in westerns garnered increasing recognition from both critics and audiences, though. He wasn't yet a superstar. He was becoming a staple in the genre, and a face that viewers came to associate with classic Western films. His strong screen presence and natural ability to embody tough, hardened characters made him a standout figure in films like High Noon 1952, which marked a turning point in his career. Van Cleef's early career also included several appearances on popular television shows of the era. Westerns were a dominant force in TV at the time, and Van Cleef capitalized on this trend, appearing in guest roles on series such as Gunsmoke and The Texan. These appearances allowed him to further refine his skills and expand his resume, even though his roles were still often limited to that of a villain or secondary character, while he continued to gain recognition as a talented actor. Van Cleef's career in the 1950s still faced challenges as a character actor. With a distinctive look, he was often typecast into roles that required him to play a tough guy or villain. While this was beneficial in terms of securing work, it also limited his opportunities to expand his range. Yet as the years went on, Van Cleef began to embrace this typecasting, knowing that it was what the audiences wanted from him. His dark, brooding persona was exactly what made him stand out in an era full of Western heroes, and it was something he eventually came to leverage to his advantage. The 1950s were a crucial time for Lee Van Cleef, as they marked the beginning of his steady rise to prominence within the Western genre. His early life, from his service in World War II to his humble beginnings in B-movies, shaped him into the man who would become a legendary character actor, particularly known for his roles as villainous figures. His ability to bring authenticity and depth to these characters made him a staple in the genre, paving the way for even more notable roles in the years to come. Lee Van Cleef's declining health. While Lee Van Cleef was still active in his career, throughout the 1970s, the effects of his unhealthy lifestyle began to take a visible toll on his body. Smoking and heavy drinking, which had been a part of his routine for years, started to catch up with him, impacting his health significantly. Van Cleef's tough guy persona on screen hid the internal battles he was facing as he continued to age and deal with the long-term consequences of these habits. By 1980, Van Cleef's health had begun to decline sharply, his issues with smoking and drinking LED to serious lung problems, which affected his day-to-day life. These health issues weren't just a temporary inconvenience. They became a permanent fixture in his life, complicating everything he did, from acting to personal interactions. His ongoing struggles with lung issues began to severely impact his ability to perform, limiting the roles he could take on, and the energy he had on set. These health problems were also closely tied to heart complications, making the 1980s a particularly challenging decade for Van Cleef. His body was in a constant state of deterioration, and he found himself battling against a variety of physical issues that made it harder to maintain his previous levels of activity. The man who once stood tall as one of Hollywood's most fearsome figures was now facing the reality of his own declining health, which undoubtedly affected his ability to pursue his career with the same intensity as before. The strain from these health problems inevitably began to have an emotional and psychological impact on Van Cleef. As well, the actor who was once so strong and resilient on screen now found himself grappling with limitations in his personal life. The combination of lung issues, heart complications, and the general toll of aging undoubtedly affected Van Cleef's mood and overall outlook on life. Though he continued working through much of the 1980s, it became clear that his ability to push through these physical challenges was growing more difficult with time. In addition to the physical toll, the mental and emotional impact of his health decline was undeniable. Van Cleef, like many aging actors, faced the reality that he could no longer rely on the same level of physicality he once had. His once iconic tough guy roles were becoming harder to execute. And this shift in his abilities brought him into a stage of his life where he had to adjust his expectations for himself both on and off screen. By the late 1980s, Van Cleef had retreated somewhat from the spotlight. Although he was still able to find roles, they were often more limited, and his appearance on screen was starting to reflect the toll his health had taken what was once a commanding presence. Now seemed more fragile, both physically and mentally. Van Cleef was no longer the imposing figure of his prime, but rather a man grappling with the harsh realities of aging and the long-term consequences of the habits that had been a part of his life for so many years. However, Van Cleef didn't let these health struggles completely define him. He continued to work throughout the decade, finding roles where his experience and depth as an actor allowed him to transition to more complex age characters, while his physical appearance was starting to change. His acting prowess remained sharp, allowing him to still leave a lasting impact on audiences. His work in the 1980s was a testament to his resilience, and it showed that despite his personal struggles, he was still a force to be reckoned with on Screen. As Van Cleef's health issues continued to worsen, in the 1980s he also faced the challenge of coming to terms with his own mortality. How did Levon transition from typecasting to SCIFI icon throughout the 1970s? Van Cleef continued to dominate the Western genre, but he also expanded his range, proving that he was capable of more than just playing the bad guy. He appeared in a variety of films, including crime dramas, further cementing his place in Hollywood. At the same time, his roles in westerns, which had originally made him famous, remained a key part of his career. The iconic image of Van Cleef as a villain continued to persist, but he began branching out into other genres, showcasing his ability to adapt to different types of characters. In 1972, Van Cleef's career took an interesting turn when he landed a role in the television series The Master. The series, which was a martial arts-based show, saw Van Cleef playing a martial arts expert. This role was a departure from his previous characters, but it highlighted his versatility as an actor. Van Cleef had always been known for his commanding presence, and the martial arts setting allowed him to display his physicality in new ways, while The Master didn't achieve significant commercial success. The show remains a notable part of Van Cleef's career as it demonstrated his willingness to take on roles outside the Western or crime drama genres in the following year. 1973, Van Cleef's career experienced a resurgence, thanks to his role in Escape from New York. A science fiction film directed by John Carpenter, this film marked a shift in Van Cleef's trajectory, allowing him to explore a new genre, SCIFI, while still maintaining the tough guy persona that had served him so well in his earlier roles. Escape from New York was not only a critical success, but it also became a cult classic, further elevating Van Cleef's status as a respected actor in Hollywood. The film, which starred Kurt Russell as the film's anti-hero, Snake Plissken, featured Van Cleef as a government official who was tasked with overseeing the prison island where the film's events take place. Though his role was secondary to Russell's, it was a memorable one, And the film's success helped reinforce Van Cleef's ability to transition between genres from westerns to crime films. And now to science fiction by the late 1970s. Lee Van Cleef had cemented himself as a versatile actor who could seamlessly move between various genres, while he was still typecast as a villain for much of his career. The 1970s allowed him to explore new opportunities and take on roles that showcased his range. The success of Escape from New York marked a turning point, as Van Cleef was no longer solely associated with westerns or the stereotypical villain roles that had previously defined him. This success in the sci-fi genre opened the door for more diverse opportunities in the years to come. Van Cleef's ability to transition from one genre to another demonstrated his skill as an actor and his willingness to experiment with different types of roles. While his iconic portrayal of tough, menacing characters in westerns and crime films remained an important part of his legacy, the 1970s saw him grow as an artist, offering audiences a wider range of performances that went beyond his well-established tough guy persona. He became a more well-rounded actor, embracing new challenges, and displaying his versatility in ways that many of his peers at the time might not have been able to achieve, despite being frequently cast as villains. Van Cleef's later career was marked by opportunities that allowed him to expand his acting range. This shift was significant, as it not only helped to revitalize his career, but also allowed him to break free from the typecasting that had previously defined his career. By taking on roles in different genres, he proved that he wasn't limited to one type of character, making him a more sought-after actor in Hollywood. The 1970s were a period of growth and reinvention for Lee Van Cleef, as he continued to appear in westerns, crime dramas, and television shows. He also ventured into new territory with roles in science fiction and martial arts. This period marked a turning point for Van Cleef's career as he successfully navigated Hollywood's often rigid casting system, earning recognition for his talent and versatility along the way. While the challenges of typecasting never fully disappeared, Lee Van Cleef's ability to diversify his career in the 1970s laid the foundation for his continued success in the 1980s, and beyond his performances during this period, proved that he was more than just the villain. He was an actor capable of taking on a wide range of characters, niche, with its own unique qualities and depth. His willingness to step outside of his comfort zone and explore new genres only served to enrich his already impressive body of work. As the 1970s came to a close, Lee Van Cleef had firmly established himself as one of Hollywood's most adaptable and resilient actors. The struggles with typecasting and breaking out of villain roles. In the early years of Van Cleef's career, Hollywood's casting system was more rigid, with actors frequently categorized into certain types based on their looks, his chiseled jawline, piercing eyes, and commanding presence. LED directors and producers to typecast him as a villain, limiting his ability to break into leading roles. In many ways, this typecasting was a double-edged sword. For Van Cleef, on one hand, it confined him to the same type of roles, but on the other hand, it made him a star in the burgeoning genre of spaghetti westerns. The spaghetti western genre, which became prominent in the 1960s, provided Van Cleef with an opportunity to carve out his niche. Directors like Sergio Leone saw the potential in his striking features and tough guy persona, which was perfect for the villainous roles that became iconic in the genre films, like For a Few Dollars More. And The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly showcased Van Cleef's skills, allowing him to become one of the genre's most recognized faces. Still, Hollywood, with its focus on the star system, didn't immediately recognize his potential outside the Western genre, leaving him to struggle in getting more diverse roles. Although Van Cleef became immensely popular with fans of spaghetti westerns, His success in these films did not translate easily to mainstream Hollywood. The perception of him as a villain, no matter how talented he was, kept him from landing the kind of leading roles that would have allowed him to break free from the constraints of typecasting. This frustration was particularly evident as Van Cleef struggled to find roles that played to his strengths as an actor outside of the narrow villain roles. Despite these early struggles, Van Cleef's resilience and determination helped him gain a foothold in the entertainment industry. His career really began to change when he landed some notable roles in the 1970s. His breakthrough role as Angel Eyes, and for a few dollars more, turned him into a household name in Europe. But it wasn't until he joined Hollywood projects that his career would begin to truly evolve. However, even as his fame began to spread, Hollywood's system of typecasting still affected his ability to break free from his villainous persona. Interestingly, while this typecasting stifled some of his opportunities, it also made him a key figure in the Western genre, particularly the spaghetti Western films that became a staple in the 1960s and early 1970s. His rugged image and distinctive features played perfectly into the hands of directors in Italy and Spain who sought actors who could portray morally ambiguous, tough characters. Films like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where he played the cold-blooded Angel Eyes, would become some of his most memorable roles. Solidifying his place in film history, Van Cleef's popularity in these films, however, didn't always align with his ambitions while he was becoming a legend in spaghetti westerns. He still longed to break free from the typecasting that confined him to villainous roles the public. Image of Van Cleef as a tough, imposing figure worked against his desire to expand his acting range. He wanted to show more of his acting chops beyond the villainous characters he was known for. This was a significant frustration for Van Cleef, as the roles that came to him often didn't match the variety he was capable of portraying. Despite this, Van Cleef was persistent, and eventually his versatility as an actor began to show in roles like Escape from New York, 1981, where he portrayed a leader, Bob Hawke, in a more nuanced and layered performance legal issues, and the classic Western bad guy. Van Cleef's experience in Hollywood was characterized by his frequent frustration at being pigeonholed into one-dimensional parts. While he was undeniably successful, the actor often felt that his talents were not fully appreciated or explored, especially by mainstream filmmakers who largely saw him as only suited for villainous roles, while Van Cleef's career was undoubtedly shaped by his iconic Western roles. The typecasting that came with it was not always a welcome label as he continued to star in spaghetti westerns, particularly in films like For a Few Dollars More, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. He built an impressive following, however many began to see him primarily as a Western villain, which made it difficult for him to break free from that image and pursue more varied roles. This was something he struggled with for much of his career, despite his clear talent and versatility. Van Cleef often found himself overlooked for leading parts, and had to work harder than many of his contemporaries to be taken seriously, as more than just a villain. Legal issues were not a significant part of Van Cleef's legacy, but that doesn't mean that his career didn't have its fair share of professional challenges. He often found himself fighting to prove that he could do more than the roles he had already become famous for, though he enjoyed considerable success as a character actor, especially in the Western genre. The demand for him to play stereotypical bad guys became a constant in his career. As a result, Ben Clark often found himself battling against Hollywood's narrow view of him as just a villain, hoping for more opportunities to showcase his broader talents. Despite these struggles, Van Cleef's reputation was undeniably linked to his role as the quintessential Western antagonist. Over the years, he became a symbol of the classic bad guy in Hollywood, particularly in the genre that had come to define much of his career. The media, too, perpetuated this image, contributing to the idea of Van Cleef as a one-note actor, which further complicated his attempts to branch out into other genres. The public perception of Van Cleef as the villain was ingrained in the minds of moviegoers and critics alike, making it difficult for him to break free from that mold. Interestingly, while Van Cleef was frustrated by his typecasting, his association with Western films also worked in his favor. He became an icon in the genre, a face instantly recognizable to fans of spaghetti westerns. His ability to command the screen, whether as a cold-blooded outlaw or a morally ambiguous character, made him one of the genre's most respected actors, despite being stuck in a box. So to speak, Van Cleef was still able to find success and maintain a significant place in Hollywood's history. His work in iconic films such as The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and For a Few Dollars More, became a cornerstone of the genre, and his performances continue to be remembered and revered by Western film fans. Why he hated John Wayne. Lee Van Cleef, a seasoned actor with a reputation for playing morally ambiguous and complex characters, is not often associated with open animosity toward other actors. However, one notable exception to this was his deep-seated disdain for John Wayne. Their rivalry was rooted in several layers, from professional disagreements to personal grievances, and it eventually grew into an intense dislike that would color their interactions both on and off-screen, while they never directly engaged in a public feud. It's clear that their animosity was fueled by a combination of their different acting styles, conflicting political ideologies, and diverging career paths. When examining the root of Van Cleef's animosity toward Wayne, one of the first things that comes to light is their vastly different approaches to acting. Lee Van Cleef was a method actor known for his ability to immerse himself deeply into the characters he portrayed. He had a penchant for playing roles that were morally complex, often characters who had intricate motivations or hidden depths. Van Cleef's acting was about creating nuance within the performance. He would bring an almost psychological complexity to the roles he played, especially as a villain in spaghetti westerns. In contrast, John Wayne's style was characterized by consistency. Wayne portrayed similar characters throughout his career, heroes who were stoic, larger than life, and rarely questioned the moral choices they made. These roles were heroic, often simplistic in their portrayal of good versus evil. For Van Cleef, this was not only boring, but also limiting. He likely saw Wayne's reliance on his own larger-than-life persona as a form of complacency in his craft, and perhaps even a bit of laziness. Van Cleef was an actor who sought to challenge his audience with layered performances, whereas Wayne seemed more content in delivering what was expected of him, the rugged, heroic cowboy. This difference in acting styles was not just a matter of creative preferences. It reflected broader philosophical differences in how they viewed their roles within Hollywood. Van Cleef believed in acting as a form of self-expression and artistic integrity, where actors could stretch their talents and find new dimensions to explore in every role. On the other hand, Wayne embraced a more formulaic approach, where his presence was so commanding that the roles themselves felt secondary to his personal persona. The tension between these two methods was palpable, and it would serve as one of the key sources of friction between them. However, their animosity wasn't just rooted in artistic differences. Their political ideologies also played a significant role in fueling their feud. John Wayne was a staunch conservative known for his vocal support of American nationalism, the Vietnam War, and various other right-wing causes. Wayne's political beliefs were well documented and were often interwoven with his public persona. He was unapologetically patriotic and believed in the ideals of American exceptionalism, which resonated deeply with his fans. particularly in the post-war era. In stark contrast, Lee Van Cleef held more progressive views, particularly when it came to foreign policy. Van Cleef was critical of American imperialism and the country's role in international conflicts, especially the Vietnam War. His counterculture leanings placed him in direct opposition to Wayne's nationalist fervor. This ideological divide further deepened their divide, as they both embodied the cultural clash of the times. Wayne's unflinching support for the American establishment was in stark contrast to Van Cleef's more skeptical and critical stance on many of the same issues for Van Cleef. It wasn't just a matter of political disagreement, it was a matter of principle. Career trajectories also played a role in their animosity. John Wayne's rise to superstardom was swift and secure. From the late 1930s onwards, Wayne became synonymous with the American Western genre, consistently cast in leading roles that reinforced his status as Hollywood's quintessential cowboy. His success was almost predetermined, with the studios continuing to offer him high-profile roles by the time he was an established star. Wayne was virtually untouchable, a symbol of everything that was considered American in the post-World War II era. On the other hand, Van Cleef's career was far more turbulent. While he made a name for himself as a villain in Western films, his breakthrough roles didn't come until the 1960s, with the rise of the spaghetti Western Van Cleef found fame, but it came much later in his career, and he never reached the level of superstardom that Wayne enjoyed his. Roles were often smaller, relegated to the margins of Hollywood's mainstream industry, despite his success in the 1960s and 1970s. Van Cleef resented the fact that the Hollywood system, which was dominated by stars like Wayne, often overlooked him for more prominent roles. This was a significant point of frustration for Van Cleef. He saw himself as a capable actor, one with the ability to offer more than the villainous types he was often cast as. But the industry's perception of him was limited by his tough guy persona. Meanwhile, Wayne's long-established star power ensured that he would continue to dominate the Hollywood landscape. Bancroft's resentment toward Wayne was also personal. He reportedly found Wayne pompous and domineering, both on and off set. Wayne's larger-than-life persona extended far beyond the screen. It bled into his interactions with fellow actors and others in the industry. Van Cleef, by contrast, was known for being more introverted and reserved, was not one to embrace the limelight, in the same way Wayne did. He disliked the way Wayne used his star power to dictate terms and throw his weight around in Hollywood for Van Cleef. It was a constant reminder of how the industry worked to favor a select few, and Wayne embodied all of those frustrations.